You're hoping for Ian this morning. Surprise. It's good to be up in front of you this morning. Have the chance to fill in for Ian while he's on vacation today. We're kind of in the middle of he don't want to call it a series, but a group of sermons talking about what sort of season we're in right now, which is this political season that's ramping up and maybe comes to a head in a couple of days. So if you were here for the last couple of weeks when we've talked about, where Ian's talked about this, 2 weeks ago we talked about, my kingdom is not of this world, which sort of had the application of it's important for us to be part of our society, part of our government, but not to be consumed by that, to understand there's a bigger kingdom that we're part of, and that's not a kingdom of this world, that it's God's kingdom, and it has nothing to do with this country or this earth. And we should be looking to our work there. And then last week, he talked about give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's, which, for a lot of us is the pay your taxes verse, but that it has an application wider than that it's really about, again, do what your government asks you to do, pay your taxes, obey the laws, be a participating citizen, but understand that you need to give God what belongs to him, which is everything, which means the majority of our time and our resources and our attention needs to go there instead. So today I hope to add one more piece to that, and then Ian will come back next week and after the election and finish this all up. So I'll start with this. This really has nothing to do with the sermon today, but when I saw that, I thought, man, isn't that appropriate? So when I started talking to Ian about what I could do today that would fit in with everything else that he had done and what he had planned, I asked him, I said, Ian, I want to do a really good job with this, so what makes for a really good sermon? And he said, make sure that you print off all the pages when you download it from the internet. No, actually, he said, don't ask your wife what she thinks of it. So Ian being no help to me on that, I then went to the place where a 21st century person would go for information, which is the internet. So I asked Siri, what makes a good sermon? And my answer was 23. 23 what? So I don't know if that means 23 verses or 23 pages or the 23rd Psalm. I'm thinking it probably means 23 minutes. So that's my goal for today. So people at home, if you're playing along with your timer, your time starts now. So the verse we're going to look at today comes from 1 Peter. It's from chapter 5, verses 6 and 7. And I want to sort of look at this verse with our idea of we're 2 days out from probably a very important day, at least in our minds, a day that might cause you some anxiety, some stress, and whatever happens on that day, I want us to sort of point back to this verse. So this is from 1 Peter. This is a letter that Peter wrote to some of his believer friends, trying to give them some encouragement. But if you read any commentary about 1 Peter, it also talks about one of the themes of this book is perseverance. And I don't know about you, but I'm guessing after Tuesday, when you combine coronavirus with whatever happens on Tuesday, we're going to need a lot of perseverance in the months ahead. So if you look at this verse, it says, humble yourselves therefore under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. And I really want to focus on that second verse about casting your anxiety on him because he cares for you. And what I want you to sort of leave with today as we point towards Tuesday, and as we think about Tuesday is probably one of the most potentially divisive days in our country's recent history. This idea of don't be anxious about what happens on Tuesday. When you go to bed on Tuesday and you wake up on Wednesday, whatever guy is the president, whatever that turns out to be, don't be anxious about that. Because we know that God cares for us. And we know that God is in control and God has a plan for us. I don't know what that plan is, but I do know that God does have a plan and that he cares for us. Now that plan might be that we have to experience some turmoil or some strife, okay? But I know that God still has a plan that ultimately is going to be good for me, good for you, good for this church, good for this country, good for our world, because that's what he's promised us. And there should be no anxiety on our part because of that. Now, that's the plan. Now, want you to indulge me for a little bit here. We're going to talk a little football. So I want to go back to 2017 because what I want to sort of look at is I have an opinion on what I'd like to see happen on Tuesday. I know you have an opinion on what you'd like to see happen on Tuesday. We sort of get wrapped up in this idea, especially with all the social media talk going on, of what needs to happen for America on Tuesday. And I don't know what that turns out to be, but I have my own desire like any person would. But sometimes what I think the future is going to be like isn't necessarily what the future needs to be. And if I trust that God's plan for the future is what it needs to be, I'm right 100% of the time. If instead, think about your own life, I'm sure you got examples of this, where you've thought about something in the future and what it's going to be, and you work towards that, and then you realize that really isn't quite what I hoped it would be, or what I thought it was going to be. And God took me in some other direction, and that was so much better. So I want to think about today what it's like when we decide what the future needs to be. So we go back to 2017. 2017, for me, as a football fan, was an important year because that was the year that for the first time in my life that I could remember, my favorite football team, which most of you know, is the Kansas City Chiefs. They decided in 2017 for the first time ever that they were going to draft their own quarterback coming out of college and invest time into that and grow that person into the next quarterback of their team for 5-10 years. And having lived in Indiana and seen Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck with the Colts and how they'd been successful drafting their own quarterback and sort of growing with that person and watching that person lead their team to success, my team's strategy had been take other people's cast-offs and rejects and try and make it work. And it never did. So in 2017, it was very clear that they were going to sort of change course with that way of thinking. As a fan, that was very exciting because it was interesting to think about what that could be like for this team that I root for. Now, don't get me wrong. I think God cares nothing about football. I have people who pray to God like, please, God, let my team win. I think it's crazy. So don't think that I'm like condoning that God cares about football one bit. But in 2017 then, leading up to the college draft, this is an article from, the great thing about the internet is nothing ever goes away. So I found this article, this is from February of 2017. I remember reading this article at that time, because at the time, getting close to the draft, this was a couple months before the draft, I'm interested in who's this quarterback going to be for my team. There's that anticipation of who's that person going to be. And the people who were smart, supposedly, agreed that one of these three people was the best choice in that draft. This is a guy named Mitch Trubisky. He went to North Carolina. He's very physically imposing, has the stature of a professional athlete. He has the sort of physical attributes that you would want. He's just not very experienced, but boy, does he have the physical traits. The guy in the middle, difficulty here on my back. Okay, there we go. He went to Notre Dame. So he's not as physically imposing as Mitch. He's still pretty physically imposing, though, don't get me wrong. But he has a history of some very good athletic talent and some very good, interesting athleticism that he displays on the football field. And then this guy on the end, his name's Deshaun Watson. He went to Clemson. Now, he's not nearly as physically gifted as the other two, but he's got the resume. He's led his team to the college national championship game 2 years in a row. He's won it once. He's a winner. So if you read what the pundits and what the smart people were saying at that time, they were saying, these are the three guys in 2017. So I'm excited about one of these three guys is going to be my team's quarterback for the future. And I have my own, because I'm reading some of this stuff in my spare time, I have my own opinion. Like, I really like this guy. I really like Mitch. Mitch seems like, man, he'd be such the perfect guy. But even these two guys would still be okay. So I'm very excited about that. Then draft day rolls around in 2017, and my team uses some of its resources to get to pick even earlier in the draft than they normally would have. So they move in front of some teams in the line. And I'm really excited about, they're going to pick one of these guys. And the guy they pick is not one of these guys. The guy they pick on that list from the screen before, on the top 10 quarterback prospects, he's number 8. If you read about his attributes, they say, well, he's got some talent, but he's kind of like wild, and he's uncontrolled, and he makes bad decisions, and we think at best he's a backup on your team. So the future needs to be instead of letting God decide what the future needs to be, and when that future takes a detour from what we think it needs to be. I didn't trust the people who knew better than I did, the people who were actually sitting in those meetings in Kansas City, talking to players, watching film, talking to each other. I didn't trust them to make the right decision. I made my own idea of what I thought it was supposed to be. I didn't trust them. I thought I knew better. I misplaced my trust. Now fast forward to today, 2020. This guy, he doesn't even start for his team. He's on his team still, but he holds a clipboard on the bench because he's such a disaster he can't even get in the game. And he probably won't be on that team much past this year. This guy, DeShone Kizer, not even in the league anymore. No team wants him even as a backup at this point. Maybe I should just hold this like this. I'm going to put it over here. Deshaun Watson. Now, he's still in the league, and he's had some level of success. Not tremendous success, but some. But his team currently this year has played 7 games and won 1. The guy that my team picked, the guy who was 8th on that list, the guy that I was initially disappointed to get, maybe you know him. That's this guy. His name's Patrick Mahomes. You've probably seen him somewhere, even if you're not a football fan, because he's everywhere. Now, he hawks ketchup and dandruff shampoo and State Farm insurance. He is the darling of the NFL right now. He's been the league MVP. He's been the Super Bowl MVP. He's won a Super Bowl. He's one of the best players in the league. He was 8th on that list. Now, I am very happy that he is the quarterback of my team. I am very happy that when that draft happened in 2017, I need to trust that some entity that knows more than I do, that has a better understanding of the plan than I do, is going to make that work out for the greater good. Just like the people who knew more than I did picked the right guy to be that quarterback for the team that I love. I need to trust that God's going to make sure on Tuesday that whatever happens, it's going to be what's right for us, for our church, for our country, for our world moving forward. Does it mean it's going to be peachy? Maybe not. But it will be good in the long run. Because I know God is in control of that election on Tuesday. I know that. I either have to accept that, or I can accept, I guess, the opposite, which is God's not in control of the election on Tuesday, which means God's sort of standing off on the sideline watching something happen with no authority in that at all. That's not the God I know. The God I know says, I'm in control of all of this. It may not be great all the time. There may be some struggle and some strife, but trust me, I have plans, and those plans are good for you as my followers. And I'm going to trust that on Tuesday. So when I wake up on Wednesday, I don't care who's president. Because I know whatever's going to happen, it's still a part of God's plan. God has ordained that presidency on Tuesday. And that is an assurance to me. So I'm going to leave with a couple of verses today, in addition to the one from 1 Peter, just to kind of reemphasize this idea that God is still in control of all this. We've got to remember that. Jeremiah. For I know this is one of my daughter Madeline's favorite verses, by the way. So if she's watching, she would know this. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. It doesn't say plans to make everything great for you. It doesn't say that. But it does promise us hope and a future. It does promise us that God is working for the greater good. It might not be the Brett Ray good, but it is the greater good. Now, sometimes those two things line up, which is great. But sometimes those two things don't line up. And I have to understand there's something bigger at work than just me. Uh-oh. Here's Psalm 55. Cast your cares upon the Lord, and he will sustain, turn it back to God. So as we think about Tuesday, as we think about politics and our election and where things go in our country that feels very divided, turn all that energy back to God. Put those cares back to God. Say, God, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why this guy is our president, but I know it's part of some plan that you have in place that's going to be good for everybody. And I'm going to trust that. And I'm not going to worry about what I want. I'm going to worry about what you want, and I'm going to try to be part of what you want. So as we talk about trust, I'm going to finish with this. Terry, this is the video. So if you're watching at home, this is the video. It's not going to be on the little screen. It's on the big screen up here, I hope. So that's where it comes from.
And we're just
This is what happens if you misplace your trust.
between one another. So Harrison, if you don't mind going first, step up here on this chair and close your eyes. All right, and then everybody fill in, and we're going to ask you to fall, and then they will catch you. So you have to trust us. I'm going to count to 3. Just relax and fall. Okay? 1, 2, 3. No, wait, no!
So, don't misplace your trust. Don't put your trust in your government. Don't put your trust in the next president. Put your trust in God, and let God be the one to work the plan for the greater good. Would you pray with me, please? Father, thank you for our chance to come together this morning. Give us some comfort heading into Tuesday to understand that at a time in our country when it feels like things are pulling apart and people are pulling apart from each other, that we know that there's still a plan that you have in place for this country, that there is some unity that will come at some point, and that everything that happens to glorify you, and help us to take comfort in that and knowing that you are still in control. Don't let us be anxious. Help us to be supportive. Help us to be part of the solution in whatever happens with our country moving forward. And help us to try and find ways to reach out to people around us who maybe think differently than we do or feel differently than we do, and try and find common ground so that we can bring some unity to our country. Above everything else, we know that our country is not the end-all, be-all, that it's your kingdom that is. So help us to not put too much of our energy into our own nation, but to think more about your kingdom, about how we can help people around us, about how we can be your hands and your feet on the earth, and about what you have in store for us someday when we get a chance to live with you in eternity. We're grateful for all the things you've done for us. Help us through the week in front of us. Help us to find ways to be servants of yours and to prioritize our lives in a way that's pleasing to you. All these things we ask in your name. Amen.